Welcome to POTUS 2016, where we call the presidential horse race and pour cold, hard facts on the overheated campaign rhetoric. I'm Marty Goldenson, in for Brian Lehrer. Most of the overheated rhetoric this campaign has come from the GOP nominee. So today we ask, what kind of person calls a sitting president the founder of ISIS and himself to become the greatest jobs president God ever created? A psychological portrait of Donald Trump coming up. And in our evidence-based politics segment, U.S.-Russian Relations 101, we need the class. Turns out Trump's campaign chairman, Paul Manafort, has been deeply involved in Ukraine politics on the Russian side. But the title campaign chairman ain't what it used to be last week. Manafort was demoted when Trump hired both a new CEO and a new campaign manager. The CEO is Steve Bannon, the head of Breitbart News, the conservative website. The choice looks like a pivot away from Manafort's Team Trump idea toward letting Donald be Donald. On the condition of anonymity, one source close to the Trump campaign told the Huffington Post Bannon will play to Trump's worst sensibilities. But why change jockeys in midstream? Yeah, time for the horse race. The last few weeks of polling haven't been kind to Donald Trump. Hillary Clinton's post-convention bounce appears to have caught an updraft, undoubtedly getting an assist from the more than $100 million spent in campaign ads. According to Nate Silver, the polling guru at 538, recent automated tracking polls all have Clinton up by about 5 percentage points. This is significant because this group of pollsters has generally shown a bias towards Trump. Factoring in that bias, Silver sees the results as confirming the 7 to 8 point Clinton lead he has been seeing from the more traditional polling. And, according to polling experts, candidates that far ahead at this stage have gone on to win the last, get this, 16 straight elections. But if this cycle has taught us anything, Donald Trump is hardly a conventional candidate, and the experts haven't written him off just yet. Note that this week, Trump is finally putting out his first campaign ads, buying airtime in 5 key states: Ohio, Pennsylvania, Florida, North Carolina, and Virginia. What are those advertisements up against? Well, with about a month to go before the first debate, Hillary Clinton currently leads in Politico's battleground states polling average by about 6 percentage points, maintaining a lead across all 11 swing states that comprise the poll. Looking ahead, if Trump loses this election, it may be a while before the Republican Party can bounce back. Why? Younger voters. Those under 35 are leaning Democratic in a huge way. The latest USA Today Rock the Vote poll shows Clinton winning handily among younger voters, 56 to 20%. Now, Mitt Romney and John McCain garnered not 20%, but more than 30% of voters under the age of 30 in the past 2 elections. Even during the protests of the Vietnam War days, Richard Nixon managed to attract 32% of young people, according to Gallup. And the aging millennial demographic, which maybe had the potential to be the light at the end of the tunnel for the GOP, well, it looks like an oncoming freight train now. According to Pew, millennials have become a larger demographic than the boomer generation. Republicans saw this coming in 2014 when their official autopsy of the 2012 election loss found that younger voters just didn't believe that Republicans cared about their issues. To say the least, the future Republican Party has challenges. All right, it's time to paint that psychological portrait of the man who nearly has derailed the GOP, Donald Trump. The psychiatric profession doesn't approve of diagnoses at a distance. after hundreds of doctors labeled GOP candidate Barry Goldwater unfit back in 1964, the Goldwater rule was put into effect. No diagnosis from afar. That's unprofessional. But of course, some professionals have ignored the rule this year. Without ever putting Trump on the couch, we've heard labels like malignant narcissist. Our guest will not diagnose. He is a psychologist. He is Dan McAdams, professor at Northwestern University. In the preface to his piece in The Atlantic magazine, he said he'd offer a dispassionate, analytical description of Trump's character, and he did. Professor McAdams joins us via Skype from Evanston right now. Welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Oh, good. Or not quite be here, but be here electronically. So I can't analyze you because you're not really here. Right. So what did you, to keep this analytical and keep it sort of fair and under the Goldwater rule, what framework did you use?
I think the framework I use comes from personality and social psychology. It's a very different game than what psychiatrists do. I mean, they're about diagnosing illness. We see narcissistic personality disorder or schizophrenia as an illness that takes over a person, and we need to diagnose that. That's not what I'm about. I'm looking at a person's life, about their personality, their character, and trying to understand their basic traits, their basic values and goals, and the story that they create about their lives to make their lives sensible. So it's a very different enterprise.
And you're using a framework which is well understood. Let's put up this graphic that shows these categories of extroversion, neuroticism, conscientiousness, agreeableness, openness. That's what you used. Who says this is a good framework? Where does this come from?
Well, that's one of the frameworks I used. It's the framework I use for understanding dispositional personality traits. And for about 50 years now, personality psychologists have kind of developed this consensus that these 5 basic traits account for individual differences in how people perform their roles in everyday life. And so I use those 5, but they're well validated. And for Mr. Trump, 2 of those 5, extroversion and agreeableness, turn out to be the big traits that account for a lot of what we see on an everyday basis.
Is he extreme on both of them?
He's extreme on both of them, but in opposite ways. So on extroversion, he's over the top, socially dominant, enthusiastic, high energy dynamo, big risk taker. I mean, that's all about extroversion. On agreeableness, a trait that, by the way, is valued in all cultures, that goes to modesty, caring, altruism. Well, you can imagine how he looks on that one. I mean, he's off the chart on the bottom, at least for a public figure.
You mentioned modesty, and I want to just play a quote from the RNC about his making billions. This is not modesty. Let's see it.
I have made billions of dollars in business making deals. Now I'm going to make our country rich again.
Yes, but on the other side, you've got agreeableness, and he is disagreeable off the charts?
Off the charts, for at least for people running for public office. I mean, if you want to do reality television, maybe he's the norm. But I mean, when you look at people who run for president, and you know, they've all been rated by psychologists, all the presidents going back to Washington, the most disagreeable one was Richard Nixon. Trump makes Nixon look like sweetness and light, I think, when it comes to his everyday behavior. And I don't think many people would disagree with that, maybe not even Mr. Trump.
But I don't get it. If he's disagreeable, why do we have such a high percentage of Americans who like him and will vote for him?
Well, you know, low agreeableness isn't bad in every way. I mean, I think the combination is interesting. You've got a very dynamic person here who's sort of charismatic. I mean, he really appeals in a kind of primal way to many people. And they like the energy, they like the strength, they like the confidence. The disagreeable part, I mean, it's mean-spirited, it's tough, and it's rough, but sometimes you say, well, I want a guy like that on my side, right? I mean, like if he's a middle linebacker or a defensive lineman, I mean, you want that kind of tough thing. We don't usually value it this much in terms of a president, however.
Yeah, let's look at his toughness for a minute, you know, the punching protester.
You know what I hate? There's a guy totally disruptive, throwing punches. We're not allowed to punch back anymore. I love the old days. You know what they used to do to guys like that when they were in a place like this? They'd be carried out on a stretcher, folks. Here's a guy throwing punches, nasty as hell, screaming and everything else when we're talking. And he's walking out, and we're not allowed, the guards are very gentle with him. He's walking out like big high fives, smiling, laughing, like to punch him in the face, I'll tell you.
So people like a tough guy. But there's another category in that chart we saw called openness, which I think maybe works in Trump's favor.
It's hard to know. With respect to that, those clips you just played, I think what's effective for him in that, I find it very repugnant, but I think many people like how he channels their anger. He lives in the angry moment, and I think that's characteristic of him. Openness, I don't know. He's kind of in the middle. Openness is a funny kind of trait. It has to do with how your mind works in terms of being open to new ideas. He flips around a lot on his ideas, and so, he's a lot more open in maybe a negative way than, say, George W. Bush might have been, who I think was very low on that characteristic, knew what he believed in, stuck with it. Trump plays it a little bit loose on that.
Yeah, George W. Bush W, as we know him,
Yeah.
was not very open. You're saying,
No.
right? But he was high on agreeableness. No.
He was a pretty agreeable guy, high extroversion, high agreeable. He had a warmth about him. He had a certain kind of vulnerability about him, actually, that I think many people found somewhat endearing. And so, very different temperament profile than Mr. Trump.
Right. All of this analysis, it seems to me, would be unimportant if it didn't have some sequelae, some effect on what kinds of choices, what kind of policies, what kind of reactions a president would have in making important choices in the Oval Office. How do we make that leap? Is there any connection?
I think with these temperament dispositions, the big five, as you've described them, or as I've described them, it goes to the style that a president will have in terms of making decisions. It may not tell you what decision he's going to make, how he's going to vote, how he's going to go one way or the other, but the style. So the high extroversion, low agreeableness, this is an impulsive, big risk-taking kind of style without a whole lot of concern about the collateral damage that might follow. I should add, by the way, with respect to the disagreeableness, there's research to show that people who are rated as disagreeable tend not to be trusted by other people as well. And there's actually objective evidence to suggest that they have a kind of loose relationship with the truth. PolitiFact and common everyday observation shows you that Mr. Trump, a lot of the things that come out of his mouth aren't too truthful.
Yes. Truthfulness. We happen to have a little graphic that shows that Trump is off the charts in lies. Let's put that up. You referred to it, but let's look at it graphically. It's interesting because people don't trust Hillary, but she actually don't lie much, at least if you look at this graphic. The pantsuit on fire on the far right, you might say, is very low.
Right.
It's very low.
I think in the case of Hillary, I think what some people would say is that she doesn't overtly lie, but we think she's hiding stuff, okay? And so that's kind of a different sort of, I think, mistrust. But with respect to the PolitiFact's graphics, Trump leads the league by a mile on lies.
Yes. So, are there, if you reach back, I think we're understanding Mr. Trump pretty well, do we have to reach back to Andrew Jackson to find another character like him who's sort of a working class representative, or at least portrays himself that way? Is there anybody like Trump in our past?
I think Jackson in some ways, although there's some big differences too. So the similarities are temperament. He was pretty outgoing and somewhat disagreeable person, although not as extremely disagreeable as Mr. Trump. But his demeanor as a man of the people, a populist, if you will. He was our first populist president, first non-aristocratic president. Mr. Trump sort of sells himself as that. He's also an outsider, of course, to Washington, as Mr. Trump is. But and another one is that there's this authoritarian thing going, this relationship that Trump has with his followers. Jackson was alleged to have with many of his followers, whereby they sort of worship him. They see him as a savior. So similarities, but differences too. Andrew Jackson stood for certain things. He believed in the Union first and foremost. He had very, very strong commitment to keeping the South from seceding. Even in 1832, that kind of stuff was happening. He had a very strong story for his own life, a man who rose up from nothing to become president. That story was inspiring to many people in America. Mr. Trump just doesn't have that. His beliefs aren't clear, and his narrative about his life It's basically a story about fighting. He's been fighting since second grade. He's been punching and counter-punching. That's not a very compelling narrative. You have to ask, well, fighting why? Fighting to get what? And you just don't get an answer to that. The story is bereft.
Yes. I was going to just wondered whether I would just take a moment to read what you wrote at the very end of that interesting article you wrote about Trump's character. And you wrote this: I can discern little more than narcissistic motivations and a complimentary personal narrative about winning at any cost. It is as if Trump has invested so much of himself in developing and refining his socially dominant role that he has nothing left over to create a meaningful story for his life or for the nation. It is always Donald Trump playing Donald Trump, fighting to win, but never knowing why.
I interview people, or not interviewed them, but read things from people who say, I've been with Donald Trump and it's weird. It's like, it's Donald Trump playing Donald Trump. I mean, like, what's behind that? And by the end of the piece, I decide there's not a lot behind that. He's got this powerful role, high extroversion, low agreeableness. There's some interesting goals that mainly have to do about self-promotion. There's a warrior story there, but that ain't much. I mean, you usually see a lot more complexity in a person, whether they're running for public office or not.
Before we move on from you to some additional evidence, I thought we'd just take a second and watch Trump's entrance at the RNC. But let me say goodbye to you now. So thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. We love you. Thank you very much. Oh, we're going to win. We're going to win so big. Thank you very much, everybody.
Time for evidence-based politics, where we pour cold hard facts on the overheated campaign rhetoric. The Republican presidential platform sure has evolved since 2012, when Mitt Romney called Russia, without question, our number one geopolitical foe. This year, Trump's people weakened its party platform in favor of Moscow so it would not promise lethal defensive weapons to the Ukrainian government, which is fighting a Russian-backed separatist insurrection. Also, early in the campaign, Trump praised Vladimir Putin. Less so now.
And Vladimir Putin, who you've expressed admiration for.
Wrong.
Well, you've expressed admiration.
Wrong.
I didn't say he's a good leader. I say he's a leader. Okay. He's respected, unlike our president. The truth is that he is strong and he's tough, and he's making our president look very bad.
So it's a person that kills journalists, political opponents, and invades countries. And invades countries. Obviously, that it would be a concern, would it not?
He's running his country, and at least he's a leader, unlike what we have in this country.
And this week, in his foreign policy speech, Trump went beyond the indirect praise of Putin with some realpolitik. Our enemies' enemies can be our friends.
I also believe that we could find common ground with Russia in the fight against ISIS. Wouldn't that be a good thing? Wouldn't that be a good thing? They too have much at stake in the outcome in Syria and have had their own battles with Islamic terrorism just as bad as ours. They have a big, big problem in Russia with ISIS.
It's true that Russia is fighting ISIS in Syria, but finding common ground would be complicated. Putin is allied with the Assad regime, a U.S. enemy. Russia now has an airbase in Iran, also a U.S. adversary, and the U.S. has sanctions in place against Russia after it annexed Crimea from the Ukraine in 2014. And there is the Paul Manafort matter. This week, the New York Times reported a paper trail suggesting that the now demoted Trump campaign chairman was involved in a corrupt money scheme tied to the pro-Russian Ukrainian government. He denies it. And then there's the hacking of the Democratic Party's computers, apparently with Russian help. Is it too conspiratorial to think that Putin prefers Trump and is helping him? A Putin pack, perhaps? Joining us, Foreign Affairs Magazine editor Gideon Rose. Welcome.
Thank you.
So you saw the Trump's Foreign Affairs speech this Monday. It was mostly about ISIS, right? What'd you make of it?
So evaluating Trump on policy is very difficult. First, he says one thing one day and something else the next day, so you don't know which thing to take seriously. Second, he obviously has so few specifics and knows or cares so little about these issues that it's really hard to evaluate them as serious proposals. And finally, because a lot of what he's doing is doing to get an obvious effect from his crowd rather than address an actual problem. But there were some good components in the speech. Some of his speechwriters are actually obviously intelligent, good wordsmiths.
Such as?
Well, you know, there were individual components of what he was saying. There was a better critique of the Obama administration for perhaps leaving more chaos behind in Iraq than they should have. And
leaving too early, I think.
Leaving too early, not pressing harder for a follow-on force, things like that, which are legitimate criticisms. There are also legitimate reasons to try to oppose terrorism, radical Islamist ideology, and so forth. So not everything in this speech was wrong. Or silly.
It was mostly a tough guy speech to make you feel like you'd be safe with him because he would take care of everything. But isn't there a fundamental contradiction there where he's against nation building, he's against this kind of he repeatedly said, I was against the war in Iraq.
He's for and against everything.
Yeah,
so it's very hard.
But he wants to go in and obliterate ISIS, but without having a war.
Yeah, see, you know, it's easy in policy to point up the problems with somebody else's problem because you're always dealing with lesser evils. You're always dealing with failed policies that have some downsides. Therefore, the only real way to evaluate policy is to say, I'm in favor of this instead of that. And Trump never sketches out what he's in favor of with enough specificity or coherence to actually make that possible. So what he ends up doing is scoring a lot of points by racking up a variety of different criticisms which don't add up to a coherent policy of their own. So that's why it's hard to really sort of nail Jell-O to the wall and say, here's what his policy be. Ironically, Russia is one of the few areas where he does seem to have a consistent policy and one that's driven more by something internal to him and his campaign.
What do you think the attraction
rather
is?
than a popular kind of thing. Nobody's clamoring for a pro-Russia policy the way they might be clamoring for anti-immigration measures or anti-Muslim policies and so forth. So the question with Russia is, why is he doing this? It's hard to say. He seems to have a fondness for strongmen. He's praised Chinese leaders, he's praised Putin, and that clearly he likes authoritarian people in control. We know that Paul Manafort, one of his chief advisors and former campaign manager, has business interests in Russia and in Ukraine, was the personal lobbyist for the former Russian proxy in Ukraine.
And for Ferdinand Marcos and other wonderful people.
And Trump himself might or might not have some kinds of business connections with certain Russian entities, although no one really knows because we don't know anything transparently about what his economic situation is. But there does seem to be a sort of desire to make good with Russia. It's almost like the one constant thing in his various foreign policy proposals. And since nobody else on the Republican side of things is pushing that, it does make you wonder why.
Yes, and quite the reverse. People on the Republican side have been pushing the opposite and assumed it would be policy.
Now, it's not entirely crazy because you could make a case that previously some Republicans have been trying to use anti-Russian feeling as a way to beat the Obama administration. And so being realistic or realpolitik and saying, look, let's cooperate with Russia where we have areas of common interest is not an entirely illegitimate policy.
Also, the people in Kiev, the leadership, which you would say that Manafort was trying to undermine, These are not wonderful democratic people. You want to give us a sense of who they are?
Well, Ukraine is a developing country with a very complex politics, in which some of the people who are in favor of an independent Ukraine and very opposed to Russia have extreme tendencies that make them unpleasant people and people unsavory.
Less diplomatic people than you refer to them as like Ukrainian Nazis.
There's a broad coalition, and some
Yes.
of the people in that coalition are unsavory.
True.
And in fact, there are a lot of good reason why we don't necessarily want to give arms to Ukraine the way that the Republican platform had originally suggested before Trump's people forced the change.
Right. Let me ask you a question. What if we went in that direction and made a kind of alliance of convenience? Where does that leave us with Assad? Could that be done?
Well, see, here's the thing. The American people in general are generally not comfortable with traditional foreign policy. They like to have things being good guys in white hats and bad guys in black hats, ideological crusades or isolationism, not involved. But the real world of foreign policy often is there are other countries with other interests. You overlap in some areas, you conflict in some areas, and you cut deals where you can. And frankly, Russia right now is a rather unsavory, increasingly authoritarian regional power. But it's not a giant threat to the world the way it used to be. It doesn't have an ideological coalition behind it. And we do have some common interest with it: anti-terrorism, nuclear proliferation, and so forth. So there's no reason why we can't cooperate with Russia on some things, as the Obama administration has done, for example, in the Iranian nuclear deal, where Russia played a key role in that. And we were cooperating with the Russians doing that and opposing them on other things such as Ukraine.
But finally, in our last 30 seconds, sorry to cut you off, but we do have just 30 seconds, to loop back to where we started this program about Trump's character. Given the subtlety of diplomacy, the difficulty of foreign relations, does Trump worry you? Does his character worry you? Is he too impulsive to be president?
So it's not my place to comment on whether he's too impulsive to be president, but I will say that the repeated outrageous statements that are sort of shocking and occasionally amusing or enthralling in a campaign context are deeply worrisome in a foreign policy context. So most of us who deal with foreign policy have spent many hours over the last several months talking down foreigners and saying, no, we're not really isolationist. No, we're not really going to walk out of NATO. No, we're not really in favor of lots of nuclear proliferation for other countries. So I don't think Trump realizes just how much damage his occasional shocking comments cause, because you can't just walk them back. They leave a residue.
All right. Thanks for coming, Gideon.
My pleasure.
And that's POTUS 2016 for today. We're here each week calling the presidential horse race and pouring cold hard facts on the overheated campaign rhetoric. Brian Lehrer will be back next week, next time. I'm Marty Goldenson. Thanks for watching.